barely 11:30. Thank you for being here. I'd like to thank each of our witnesses for taking time out of their schedules to provide testimony on the ways the Affordable Care Act is affecting the self-employed. We have an excellent panel, and I look forward to hearing their testimony and the discussion to follow. According to the Office of the Chief Counsel of Advocacy of the United States Small Business Administration, small businesses represent 99.7% of all businesses, employ 49% of all workers in the private sector, and account for 42% of the private sector payroll in the United States. Self-employed folks make up a significant portion of the businesses. According to the National Association for the Self-Employed, over 77% of small businesses in the United States are self-employed businesses. As enacted, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, requires large employers to offer full-time employees the opportunity to enroll in an employer-sponsored health care plan or pay a penalty. The law also requires individuals to enroll in health care insurance either on their own or through the plans offered by their employer or pay a penalty. These requirements are referred to as the employer mandate and the individual mandate. While the administration has delayed the employer mandate twice, it has not delayed the individual mandate, which became effective on January 1st. Typically, the self-employed purchase health insurance on the individual or non-group market and would be required to carry coverage via the individual mandate. While meeting with my constituents and reading their testimony, the witnesses' testimony, it is clear to me that the Affordable Health Care Act, Obamacare, is causing significant difficulties for self-employed individuals and small businesses in general. General confusion over higher prices and shrinking provider networks are a few of the problems we have consistently heard about. Earlier this year, the Small Business Association released a study providing evidence that the health care law is having a significant impact on small businesses. Among the key findings were that 91% of respondents experienced increases in their health care plan at their most recent renewal, and 33% said they are purposefully not growing as a result of the health care law. Perhaps most significantly, the survey reported that the average monthly per employee cost of health care insurance premiums for small businesses is $1,120, nearly double what it was 5 years ago. While the NSBA survey was for small businesses in general, a recent NASE survey specifically queried self-employed individuals and micro businesses. The survey found that nearly 60% of respondents believe there is a low or very low chance they will be able to secure affordable and comprehensive coverage in 2014. Other key findings were that only 9% of those available to visit the Affordable Health Care website, Obamacare.gov website, reported they had successfully enrolled in health care insurance plans for 2014, and almost 17% of those responded indicated that they were foregoing health care insurance altogether in 2014 due to the cost. Just 2 weeks ago, the administration's own Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services released a report predicting that the health care law could cause premiums to increase for nearly 2/3 of small to medium-sized businesses. The report stated that 11 million individuals will experience increases in premiums as a result of the health care law. Clearly, the Affordable Health Care Act is causing significant disruptions for American small businesses. What I hope to do today is identify the specific issues that are most critical to the self-employed and discuss potential solutions. Again, I thank you all for being here. I now welcome Ms. Ring, our ranking member, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Affordable Care Act introduced numerous reforms to the insurance market for both individuals and businesses. In this committee, we focused on the effect the law has on small business owners. Today's hearing will allow us to turn our attention to the self-employed. Under the law, these business owners have access to the individual marketplace rather than the shop exchanges. Regardless of which market they use to obtain health insurance, these entrepreneurs remain integral to our global competitiveness, innovation, and growth. And that is why considering how the healthcare law affects this group is critical to their success and the nation's continued recovery. Prior to the law, the self-employed had to rely primarily on catastrophic plans. These limited plans provided very basic coverage, and for that reason, many were eliminated. The individual exchanges took their place. This marketplace provides guaranteed health benefits and maximizes the ability to effectively pool participants, resulting in more competition and lower costs. Over 6 million uninsured self-employed individuals will shop and purchase health insurance on these new markets. In fact, the most recent enrollment data indicate that roughly 4 million people have now signed up for a private health insurance plan through the marketplaces since October 1st. But enrollment hasn't occurred without a few hiccups. Like small businesses with employees, the self-employed have faced some questions in their attempts to enroll. This hearing will give us a chance to hear some personal experiences with enrollment and gather information on how it can be improved. While we know cost is one issue, the ACA is acting to balance premiums for those who once paid higher rates just for having a pre-existing condition. Through modified community rating, guaranteed essential health benefits, prohibition of pre-existing condition exclusions, and standardization of cost-sharing burdens, coverage under the ACA is expected to create more stable premium pricing. Despite this stability, many self-employed business owners may still experience an increase in the cost to buy insurance coverage. However, these costs are mitigated by premium subsidies, one advantage of using the individual marketplace to help offset the cost of premiums. About 11 million uninsured Americans may be able to pay $100 or less per person for coverage purchased through the marketplace using the premium credits. Many of them will be the self-employed who can never afford coverage before the ACA. As more Americans gain quality health coverage, job lock will be reduced. This newfound freedom allows more Americans the ability to take risks and start their own businesses, spurring innovation and economic growth. One study estimates that the ACA will lead to an 11% increase in self-employment. But the fact remains that any impact of the ACA cannot immediately but be known as it takes time to implement the law and allow employers the chance to enroll. Purchasing health insurance, regardless of your business structure, is complex, and many factors must be considered. We're here today to learn more about those factors. In order to ensure the success of our self-employed, we must understand the challenges and benefits the law has for entrepreneurs. I thank all the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to your comments. Thank you, and I yield back.
In the interest of Mr. Baker's schedule, we'll let the ranking member introduce him.
Our next witness is Dean Baker, the co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C. He is frequently cited in economics reporting in major media outlets, including the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, CNBC, and National Public Radio. Mr. Baker has written several books, his latest being Getting Back to Full Employment, A Better Bargain for Working People. He previously worked as a senior economist at the Economic Policy Institute and an assistant professor at Bucknell University. He has also worked as a consultant for the World Bank, the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Congress, and the OECD's Trade Union Advisory Council. Thank you for testifying today, Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Ranking Member Mang and Chairman Hanna, and I appreciate your accommodating my schedule, and I apologize that I do have to leave at noon due to an earlier commitment, so I will have to leave early. I want to make three main points in my comments. First off, that I expect the Affordable Care Act to end the job lock that people have felt because of the need for health insurance, and based on research, I think that's likely to lead to an increase in people turning to self-employment on the order of 15 to 25%. That removes a major impediment to people taking the jump to self-employment. Secondly, it should improve job retention at small businesses. One of the reasons that workers often leave a smaller business is that they need health care insurance that smaller businesses often find it difficult to provide. By allowing people to get affordable insurance through the individual market, that should relieve one of the major reasons that good workers often leave a small business. And the third point is that there's been a big impact on costs. Costs have slowed rapidly. Clearly, not all of that is due to the Affordable Care Act, but I think it's fair to say a substantial portion of it is. And as a result of that, I think small businesses, really all businesses, are paying lower premiums than would otherwise have been the case. Now, taking the first point, it's a difficult issue. Economists often find themselves scratching their heads. How do you measure this? Because we know that workers are less likely to leave a job that provides health insurance because, in general, those are better jobs. So that's not really news. Also, it will tend to be the case that you have workers that value security, so they'll look for jobs with health care insurance. So we try to find ways that get around these factors. And there have been 3 recent studies that I think are especially compelling. In one case, the study took 11 years of data from the current population survey. That's the main labor market survey that the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses. And it looked at the likelihood of people being self-employed depending on whether their spouses had health insurance. The idea being if my spouse has health insurance, I'm able to get health insurance through my spouse. And it found there was a very big difference. People are much more likely to be self-employed if their spouse had insurance than if that wasn't the case. The other way in which it examined the issue, it looked at the rate of self-employment as people turned 65, became eligible for Medicare. There's a big jump in self-employment at that age. There's no comparable jump at age 60, age 55. Clearly, being eligible for Medicare makes a very big difference. A second study that, again, tried to get around the problems looking at this issue, looked at the behavioral risk factor surveillance system, a very large survey. They had a sample of over 380,000 people, and the particular issue they were looking at was a health care reform in the individual market in New Jersey instituted in 1993, and they looked at the impact of that on self-employment in New Jersey relative to neighboring states and the rest of the country, and they found an increase in self-employment on the order of 11 to 20%, a very large increase. The third survey involved a very large sample. This was done with the American Community Survey, a sample of 2.6 million. They were looking at young people, 19 to 25, who were newly eligible to be covered by their parents' insurance because of the Affordable Care Act. And again, they found a very large chunk in self-employment among that group relative to people who were just older or just younger, suggesting that the option of being covered on their parents' insurance had a very big impact on their willingness to be self-employed. And I just point out this is really striking because this is a group 19 to 25. We would think health care insurance is in general not a very important factor. Nonetheless, they found very strong results. The second point I was going to make, there's a number of studies that show that people are more likely to leave a job that doesn't have insurance if they have a sudden need for it, and the usual item to test is if their spouse becomes pregnant. So you have married men that typically may not have much need for insurance. Suddenly they're looking at a situation of a newborn child. They're very likely to leave their job. Having the option of getting insurance through the individual market is likely to decrease the number of people who leave jobs where they can't get insurance through their job, which should be a big benefit to small businesses that lose a lot of good workers for that reason. The last point, as I was saying, it's well known we've had a sharp slowdown in cost. Health care cost, if we look at Medicare costs, they're about 10% lower today than was projected back in 2008. That's pretty much across the board the story. I won't say the Affordable Care Act was the whole reason for the slowdown in cost, but I think it was certainly an important part of the reason. And what that means is even though there are a lot of reasons the Affordable Care Act might make specific policies more expensive, in aggregate we're looking at a situation where I think most employers are paying much less for insurance. So in conclusion, I would just say I think we will see a lot more people taking the leap to self-employment. I think we'll look at a situation where small business employers will find it easier to keep people on the job, and also those that are providing insurance will be able to do so at a lower cost. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next witness is Todd Mccracken, President of the National Small Business Association. Since becoming President in 1997, he has directed all activities of the advocacy-oriented association. As Director of its Government Affairs arm, Mr. Mccracken plays a key role in developing the NSBA's policies on issues and strategic that are strategic in strategies in implementing them. Since becoming to the association, Mr. Mccracken has testified before Congress numerous times about issues ranging from fundamental health care reform to tax code restrictions. Mr. Mccracken, you may begin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting me today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about these very important issues that are somewhat vexing to the small business community, especially to the self-employed. I'll try to summarize my statement, which I understand will already be submitted to the record. We are deeply troubled by the ongoing difficulties our healthcare system creates for small businesses and their employees, and by the fact that the most recent national effort to reform the healthcare system has made many of these difficulties worse. I'd like to kind of summarize a survey that we do on a regular basis that looks at the issues facing small businesses in the healthcare arena. The latest one that we just released last month shows how America's small businesses are dealing with rising healthcare costs, what kind of benefits they offer, and how the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act is impacting their businesses. The survey confirmed what has been widely reported about healthcare costs for our smallest companies. They are rising steeply, and entrepreneurs are deeply concerned about what the future might hold. Though we continue to hear that medical inflation is down and overall healthcare costs are rising only slowly, which is certainly good news, evidence of such trends are hard to find in the small business community. In our recent survey, 91% of businesses reported increases in their health plan premiums at their most recent renewal, and 1 in 4 reported premiums going up more than 20%. Since 2009, which is when we started asking this question, the average per employee health premium has increased by 90%. It's key to recognize that during the same period, growth and profits have largely been stagnant. So it is little wonder that businesses are focusing on this area of ever-increasing costs and wondering whether the current system is one they can continue to afford, and increasingly worried that the Affordable Care Act will only add to their miseries. Remember, these costs have real-world implications on how businesses are run. Our survey shows that a third of companies held off hiring a new employee, and more than half say they held off on salary increases for employees as a direct result of higher insurance costs. Of course, these employment decisions are both a reflection of current costs and a window into uncertainty about what the future may hold, both for the economy and the healthcare system. The self-employed, of course, face very distinct issues as they move forward, and Dr. Baker, I think, talked about some of those that the self-employed face, and specifically sort of nascent entrepreneurs and decisions to start a company, and we have long held that appropriately structured healthcare reform can actually ease the job lock that health insurance imposes on those folks and free more people up to start companies. Unfortunately, what we're seeing right now is that while there is an end to many insurance routing practices that have concerned people, there's also a great deal of uncertainty about whether the individual mandate will be effective at bringing in healthier lives. And what the overall premiums are going to be. So the questions now are actually for relatively healthy, relatively young potential entrepreneurs, and they no longer will be able to buy relatively inexpensive, high deductible health insurance for themselves. They're going to have to buy very expensive, much more comprehensive coverage if they go into the marketplace for themselves. So I think we're replacing one kind of job lock with another potentially, and that's a little bit concerning. One of the things that we think we can do to help ameliorate that a little bit is at least for a while to loosen those age bands until we're clear that the individual mandate will be effective in stabilizing the overall health insurance market, and that we really will have healthier risks subsidizing the higher risks. And we also think that it's really important for Congress to provide some equity for the self-employed through the tax code. I mean, right now most people don't realize this, but if you have a job and your employer pays for your premium, and even the part of the premium you pay as an employee, all of that is tax-free, not just for income taxes, but for your FICA taxes. It's totally pre-taxed. But if you're a self-employed person providing insurance, your own portion of that is not exempt from FICA taxes. And since self-employed pay both halves of the FICA taxes in the self-employment tax, that's 15% that they pay on their health premiums that no one else in the workforce pays for their employer-provided health coverage. So we'd like to see that corrected, and that would give you a 15% discount essentially for the self-employed on their health insurance right off the top. I'll stop there and welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Alan Shulman, founder and president of Insurance Benefits and Advisors in Rockville, Maryland. Founded in 1989, his company is a full-service employee benefit firm working with clients in size from 2 to 1,000. Mr. Shulman advises and implements and services all employee benefits, including health, dental, life, long-term care, and disability insurance for his clients. Mr. Shulman, you may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Hanna. Good morning. My name is Alan Shulman, and I am self-employed health insurance agent from Rockville, Maryland. I represent my professional association, the National Association of Health Underwriters, and my client, the Council for Affordable Health Care. I help my clients purchase health coverage and service those benefit plans all year. Almost all of my clients are self-employed or have less than 50 employees. Thank you for inviting me to testify. The impact of health reform on small business owners is often downplayed because we don't have to follow the employer mandate. Really, though, we are in the middle of a seismic shift due to health reform, and for us, no new requirements have been delayed. I will focus today on 3 key issues. For many small business owners, most of the impact of the law won't be fully felt until this coming fall. The new rules and related cost increases are changing small business health plan options. Owners are seriously reevaluating coverage. There are practical and bipartisan solutions to the problems faced by small businesses. Small employers renew their health plans year-round, and most small group changes take effect on the anniversary of the business's plan year in 2014. Last year, a variety of circumstances caused many small employers to switch their anniversary date to December 1. 80% of my clients switched. These employers won't really experience health reform till this coming September and October when they start reviewing their new health plan options for the year ahead. President Obama famously campaigned on, if you like your health plan, you can keep it. Millions with individual coverage realized that wasn't exactly true on January 1. Many more small employers will find out that over the course of this year, too, and most of them this coming fall. A big and unexpected change for small employers is the cost of modified community rating and the new national health insurance premium tax, or the HIT. There are some bipartisan bills to fix these cost drivers, including H.R. 763 to repeal the HIT and H.R. 544 to fix the law's current very narrow age bands. However, the way HHS has implemented the age bands is causing a separate big problem for very small employers, too. Before health reform, rates did not reflect the ages of all the employees in a group, but employers and employees never felt the breakdown because they always got a composite rate. So all employees were charged the same average price. Composite rates were both an administrative convenience and an important protection against age discrimination. Now, due to the way the age band rules were written by HHS, it's virtually impossible for a carrier to give an employer a composite rate. Here is a real-life example. Due to HIPAA privacy constraints, I can only give you the basics of this group. The employer has between 20 and 30 employees. Last year, the single composite rate for everyone in the group, whose ages range from early 20s to mid-50s, was approximately $300 a month per employee. The employer paid about 2/3 of the single coverage costs for all employees. Last month, I shopped for a group plan looking at all of the health plan options available in the state of Maryland. The best scenario for fully insured group coverage had a rate of approximately $325 a month for the youngest employee and over $900 a month for those employees in their 50s. Naturally, the employer was extremely distressed, and not just about the increased costs. The idea of explaining to the older employees how much more they will have to pay is unsettling, and my client was worried about legal costs should an employee file a complaint. My client considered dropping coverage, but ultimately moved to a level funding arrangement exempt from both the age bands and the HIT. This scenario is going to happen to small business owners nationwide each month this year, with most learning about the problem next fall when they go to renew their current coverage and find out they can't. Prices will be increasing and plan options are also going to change. The new law imposes a deductible cap of $2,000/$4,000 for small employers only, which will make it much harder for employers to offer consumer-directed health plan options. I want to make this point clear. The cap only applies to small groups. It has no peer requirement for individuals or companies like IBM. House Bill 2995, a bill to repeal the cap, has been introduced by Congressman Tom Reed, a Republican, and Mike Thompson, a Democrat. CAHC commissioned a study by Avalier showing that it would help employers retain coverage, thereby lowering premium subsidy costs by $1.2 million over 10 years. My hope is that every member of this committee will co-sponsor the bill and that Congress will take action to restore health plan choice options for small employers. Another problematic change for small employers is the out-of-pocket limit cap, which is being implemented in a way that conflicts with time-tested benefit practices. The essential health benefit requirements for pediatric vision and dental are barely understandable to benefit professionals and issuers. For the small employer just trying to run his or her company, they are mind-blowing. Large employer concerns may command more media and regulatory attention, but health reform's compliance and cost burden is causing a ton of anxiety and disruption for self-employed guys like me, too. It is making employers change their hiring practices, explore other ways of providing coverage the private market may offer, and consider dropping coverage altogether. But I've highlighted the bipartisan solution to some of these problems. My hope is that Republicans and Democrats can rally around these solutions because small businesses and the self-employed are facing real problems right now. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I welcome any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shulman. Our next witness is Charlie Arnold, President and owner of Arnold Power Wash in Lewis, Delaware, which does both commercial and residential cleaning of all types of exterior surfaces. He is on the board of directors for Power Washers of North America, holding the positions of Secretary and Environmental Chairman of the Eastern United States, as well as being an author and instructor for certification classes. Thank you for being here, Mr. Arnold. You may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Hanna and Ranking Member Mang. The members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to share today the impact the Affordable Care Act is having on small businesses and the self-employed. My name is Charlie Arnold, and I am president and owner of Arnold Power Wash, LLC, located in Lewis, Delaware. It is a family-owned professional power wash company organized in commercial and rental divisions, cleaning all types of exterior surfaces along with fleet washing and dry ice blasting. Like many self-employed, I wear various hats, from being a small business owner to a community leader. In addition to owning and operating Arnold Power Wash, I'm also proud to serve as pastor of Seaside Church, director of emergency services for 1-800 Board Up, director of sales for eClean magazine, and I volunteer as the EMS captain for Lewis Fire Department and past EMS chief. Also serve as vice president of Power Washers of North America, and finally, it is my role on the member council for the National Association of Self-Employed that I'm offering my testimony today. NACE is our nation's leading advocate and resource for America's 23 million self-employed micro-business owners. It is in all of these roles that I'm able to provide a unique perspective and firsthand experience regarding the impact of the Affordable Care Act has had on nearly 23 million self-employed Americans, the largest potential consumers of Obamacare. Until recently, I found myself ignoring the Affordable Care Act because I have insurance coverage that I'm happy with, but have found out that it may change June 1st. I'm a business owner with fewer than 50 employees. My employees have insurance that are provided elsewhere. Therefore, I thought it would have no impact on my business or me, but I was wrong. My eyes have been opened, and I see the devastation that AC is causing. Because it's not based upon lies or opinions or ideas or rumors, but upon what I've been told personally in the last 2 weeks, especially by other business owners and their employees. Quickly put, real skyrocketing premiums with increases ranging from $300 to $1,600 a month, partially because of the new age banding pricing, a fact based upon letters in my possession, is causing not just fear, but terrified households, and realistically means less discretionary income, which translates into much less job opportunities for my business. One proposed answer has been tax credits, but they can't replace what you don't have in the first place. Fear causes lack of confidence, which causes stagnation in the marketplace. I'd also like to reemphasize in the recent conducted survey by NACE that 60% of the respondents said that they thought there was a low or a very low chance that they'd be able to secure both affordable and comprehensive coverage in 2014. Last year, my business dropped over 50% because people were afraid of the economy. I could graph the drop in business every time the government talked about budget problems and couldn't make a decision. This year, people are not only afraid, they are terrified because all of a sudden they have an average of $500 a person a month being taken out from under them by mandate to pay for health coverage, and $500 is the average cost to clean a house in my business. The bottom line is that the United States government has become my greatest competitor last year and this year. Greater liability and greater ACA penalty liability may be imposed upon my company because I lease my employees. Not only have my direct costs to lease employees gone up 3%, but based on the interpretations of the law, my cost to lease these employees may go up, containing the cost of providing the ACA coverage, even though I only have 2 full-time employees and 7 part-time seasonal employees. I am glad, however, that the U.S. House passed a much-needed 1-year extension for the compliance for small businesses and individuals. It never makes sense to me as a small business owner why large businesses always get the breaks when small businesses make up the majority of the business in America. There are far more people like me than CEOs like at GM. The majority of jobs and the spreading of wealth take place at the small and micro business level. The constraints also placed upon the usage of HRAs, health reimbursement arrangements, has made them almost unusable. Unless I provide ACA coverage for my employees, then I cannot offer them help for any other health-related expenses, which makes no sense to me. It seems to be a little help is better than none, but it seems like, as it's written now and rulings have been put in place, that it's another all-or-nothing idea, which helps no one because it will default to nothing. The simple, effective consumer reforms need to stay in place, like not being declined for pre-existing conditions, no lifetime limit on coverages, and caps on out-of-pocket expenses. We must work together to overcome these fears, the myths, and the wrong interpretations of the ACA causing such great confusion. I, on behalf of the National Association of Self-Employed, thank you for the opportunity to offer the self-employed perspective on the ACA, on how the ACA has impacted our community.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Mccracken, a couple things Mr. Baker mentioned. I'm glad he's still here. The portability, okay, good thing. Everybody likes it. Do we need the Affordable Health Care Act to have portability, which is apparently become one of the major defenses of this act? Second thing, how can an act or a health care law that represents close to 18–20% of the economy, and we've seen increasing costs up until recently, but how and Mr. Baker, I'll give you a chance to respond, how can it possibly be that a health care law that's only been in existence for a very short period of time can make the claim that it has indeed cut costs? And thirdly, we talk about job lock, and we mentioned, Mr. Baker mentioned that people 65 and older are going into businesses of their own. But, I mean, that's probably the most logical thing to do at 65 if you're healthy and interested after you've retired from a full-time job and perhaps are on Medicare. So, Mr. Mccracken?
Yeah, I think on the last one, it does strike me as certainly anecdotally, I know a lot of people who retire from work and then do a little bit of consulting, and they're therefore be considered as self-employed. So it does strike me that's the likelier explanation for a big jump in self-employment at retirement than health insurance, although plainly health insurance could play a role for some people. And the job lock issue, I don't think we have to have the Affordable Care Act as currently structured to deal with the job lock. In fact, if the high costs that come with the Affordable Care Act because of the high level of benefits and so forth, and the very tight rating bands, really do make us concerned whether the individual mandate will even be effective in achieving anything close to universal coverage. And it should be that individual mandate that helps to create the right kind of market forces. to enable the kinds of insurance reforms and
To that
balance
end, though,
premiums.
isn't it also true that the 4 million people that have already signed up, for the most part, already had insurance?
I believe that's the case. I don't have those exact numbers, but I think a lot of people have moved from one form of coverage to another.
Go ahead. Sorry.
But certainly job lock is an issue, and if we can get the right kind of affordable coverage available broadly that's not always tied to a workplace, that clearly would help the small business community. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't think there should be any debate about that. But the question is this the kind of reform that's going to get us there? And we don't think so.
In the interest of Mr. Baker's schedule, Ms. Mang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that Mr. Baker has to leave soon. I apologize. I will momentarily have to leave also. We're in the middle of a markup on a bill regarding Ukraine in the Foreign Affairs Committee, but I will be back. Mr. Baker, the Affordable Care Act contains some provisions that may increase the cost of coverage, while many others, like the small business tax credits, the availability of the exchanges, and premium subsidies, hold costs down. All things considered, do you believe the ACA has helped expand coverage for the self-employed who have previously been completely shut out of traditional markets?
Well, I would say my assessment at this point is almost certainly yes. Just to refer back to a couple of the points Mr. Hanna had Representative Hanna had raised, the efforts to have portability, these go back, at least a quarter century. We passed COBRA back, I think it was 1985, if I remember correctly, and then there was the Health Insurance Portability and Affordability Act, I think in 1995 or thereabout. And those were somewhat beneficial, but those did not solve the problem clearly, and we have a lot of data showing that. So I think that allowing this portability, and again, getting back to your point about allowing people with small businesses, allowing people the freedom to start small businesses and not have to worry about getting affordable health insurance, I think that's a very big net positive. And then also in terms of the health care cost, again, it's well documented health care costs have slowed sharply. Many provisions of the Affordable Care Act came in as early as 2011. Among other things, there was a limit on a requirement that there was a medical loss ratio of at least 80%. I know my own think tank, we received rebates from our insurer for both 2011 and 2012 because of that provision. And also, again, how much this is due to the Affordable Care Act or not, I can't really say. Our cost actually increased much, much less. We were used to double-digit price increases through most of the last decade, and we've had very slow increases in the cost of our insurance. And just the last point on age 65, of course, people will take the opportunity when they retire, but most people actually retire well before 65. The age at which, median age at which people start to collect their Social Security benefits is 62 and 11 months. It might be 63 now, but it's well below 65. So that wouldn't explain this break that we see. There's a big jump just when people turn age 65 and qualify for Medicare.
Thank you. Mr. McCracken. I think Mr. Hillskamp?
Yeah, a quick question, if I could, before Mr. Baker leaves, and I think, I don't know if Mr. McCracken answered that, but the other two gentlemen did. What do you do, Mr. McCracken, do you have employees, and how do you handle insurance for them?
Well, I run an association, but we are essentially a small business, and we provide health insurance for our employees.
Okay, and Mr. Baker, yourself?
Yeah, we have insurance at our workplace, roughly 20 people, and we've had insurance pretty much since we started in 1999.
And your premium increases, do they match what I've heard for other small businesses?
We've been very pleased with our increases the last 3 years. They've been somewhere in the order of 2%. I mean, I won't vouch for that exact number, but it was in that ballpark, whereas, 2008, 9, 10, we were looking at double-digit increases. And again, I'm not trying to say the Affordable Care Act explains that fall-off, but we have very little to complain about in terms of recent price increases.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. I knew you were leaving quickly. Mr. Arnold, I appreciate your testimony from, was that Lewes, Delaware? Is that how you pronounce that?
Lewis.
Lewis, population 2,797. That's kind of what I'm used to as well. But, Mr. Arnold, we've seen with this administration in the last number of months, 29 times, I think, is the latest count, where the administration simply waved some executive wand and made changes, particularly for large employers. If you had to pick one that you would like the President and the administration to wave their wand again, which one would you pick to say this is the most troublesome aspect for the next 12 months for small businesses in your association that you represent?
Because of some of the information that's coming forward now, I would say, this extension of the deadline for small businesses and individuals, because there still is so much myth and misunderstanding out there that I can't tell you that I can be completely compliant. I need the extension.
And that's what I hear from a lot of the small businesses. Even if they're trying to comply, they're not certain if they can, and they certainly can't afford it in many cases. And for folks that are worried about a job trap, I'm worried about small businessmen and women actually trying to make their payroll and meet their obligations they feel to their employers. It's become exceedingly difficult, and and maybe it's obviously different across the state. If you're across the states, if you're under 35 in Kansas and you are self-employed, your penalty for being self-employed was a 100% increase of your premiums on January 1st. And who would want to step into that situation? And that is an incredible burden. So I appreciate the real-life experience. Lastly, on the self-employed tax penalty, I'm not sure Mr. Shulman, Mr. Mccracken brought that up, but I was not here when the previous majority passed the President's health care plan. Any explanation why they left such a significant penalty on small businesses, on the owners? This is it's just amazing and shocking that they would leave that penalty in place when they had an opportunity to change that.
Well, I think it comes down to priorities in terms of the revenues. We advocated strongly for that being included. It's been a disparity in the tax code for quite a number of years, and we've been arguing for its change for a very long time. There was a very brief period in 2000 and I lose track of time, 2010, I think, 2011, where we actually did achieve some measure of equity there for a short period of time. It expired after a year, and we think we need to restore that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Mccracken, the administration's latest unilateral change, not the one last night, but the one last week, delayed the requirement that coverage meet minimum coverage standards. Doesn't this delay come after many small business owners had already purchased more expensive coverage? How do we make them whole, and how does this affect them?
Yeah, it comes after lots of decisions have already been made, unfortunately. While on balance, it's probably better to have that decision than not to have that decision, but it is rather late in the game, probably is going to have relatively negligible impact in the real marketplace as a result of that fact. And I frankly am not quite sure what we do about it moving forward, and what would be the best.
So the idea is that compliance has become its own penalty.
There is something to that, and meanwhile, the compliance with the overall way the purchase insurance has been lost in the mix. It's already a very low penalty, and that's really our biggest ultimate concern, is that we're requiring insurers to guarantee coverage to everybody, regardless of their past coverage, regardless of their past health experience, and within a relatively narrow age band. And if we don't see significant progress towards getting everyone into this market, it's going to become unaffordable for most people who are trying to buy coverage. And that's ultimately our biggest concern, and the whole thing is simply going to collapse.
Mr. Shulman, how have the many cancellations and postponements that the administration has announced been difficult for you, insurance professionals like yourself? What have you seen on the street?
Not speaking specifically to that, but what I do see on the street after reading everybody's studies and surveys is in December, I received in my group a 73% increase. In January, the group I mentioned in my testimony was a 62% increase. I'm leaving here to see a restaurant in D.C. with a 43% increase. Yesterday, I received 3 client renewals for May. The lowest one was a 43% increase. They ranged in the 60s and another one in the 80s. I believe that everything that is going on, the committees, all the talk, all the back and forth, is spending money that is rolling back into the ACA.
Have you seen any decreases at all on any of your clients?
Mr. Hanna, I didn't get time to say anything to Mr. Baker, but in the last 24 months, I have not delivered a renewal that was reduced, not increased.
How many renewals would
in the last 24 months? I've delivered to each of my clients twice every 12 months 100 renewals. So And again, I am glad to send to anyone in the committee with names redacted. We can leave a zip code so we can see this is Maryland,
But to get this straight, in
D.C.
your business, in all your client base, you have not seen a single reduction in cost?
No, sir.
Wow, that's,
So to
my goodness.
answer the beginning of your question, the delays add more confusion, more problems at the workforce for all these people that are represented here and myself, because as soon as you get ready to do one thing, there's a change from last night or 2 weeks ago. So it has all been negative to the end user, which is where I interface with a renewal.
Have you seen anyone go out of business over this? Have you, other than threats, anxiety, have you seen anyone actually say, I'm out, I can't do it?
A couple groups that were just in the twos, I have seen decide to just let go of their employees and try to go it literally on their own.
So you've seen, in some cases, a loss of employment?
Two groups in the last 12 months, clients of mine, have done that.
And do you know from your experience talking to other people that do what you do, is this fairly widespread? Is this?
Yes. Recently, about 3 weeks ago, the National Association of Health Underwriters had their annual Capitol Conference here on Capitol Hill, and brokers from as far as Alaska, Washington are there. And we also have a convention once a year we meet. And every single person I speak to has that issue.
Thank you. Mr. Arnold, as you know, the employer mandate has been postponed, but the individual mandate, which requires individuals to purchase health insurance, has not.
Okay.
Which is what we're talking about. We voted yesterday to delay the individual mandate, but we have to wait on action from the Senate and the President to do that. Do you think it's fair that self-employed small business owners who must obtain insurance on the individual exchange have been excluded? I guess that's kind of a loaded question, but
it is unfair.
We do that around here.
Yeah, I mean, it truly is unfair. Again, why are the larger businesses getting the breaks when small business doesn't? You know, larger businesses have a greater percentage of their cash flow to be able to deal with different things. A small business doesn't have wiggle room, you know, to be able to deal with any kind of new issues that come up, especially when they blindside you like they are right now.
Mr. Mccracken, how many people in the country are like Mr. Arnold, individual, self-employed, smaller, sometimes single proprietorships?
I believe that there are about 11 million self-employed people who derive their primary income from self-employment, and there's another, at least that many, who do some level of self-employment activity but may have other sources of income as well.
So they're left hanging through this.
That's right.
They really aren't part of the, they're not being given for latitude through relief from the individual mandate, and yet in some strange way they're also not considered part of that. Is that?
Yeah, there's lots of places, particularly in our tax code, where for business owners, even if they're just single individual, are not considered, quote, employees. And we define lots of various kinds of benefits around going to employees, which is one of the issues around the self-employment tax and health insurance that I described before.
Mr. Mccracken, is there anything I mean, you have such a wide network. What would you envision an effective healthcare system look like? Even if you want to limit it just to portability, which is clearly the kind of the fallback support for this healthcare law, it seems to me there's lots of ways to provide portability, and of course we've heard of a couple.
There are lots of them. We've been committed to having a private healthcare marketplace, and there's a time we started talking about healthcare reform more seriously in 2009, and we were hopefully optimistic because we do think it should revolve around the individual, and we do think that providing portability so that people can make decisions about employment regardless of their health care situation, makes a lot of sense. So we do think the system in which individuals take primary responsibility, but employers can still have incentives to offer coverage makes a lot of sense, which from the 30,000 view looks something like what we have. The problem is, as the efforts to create the law got rolling, the levels of required benefits, the tightness of the rating rules and everything else added a great deal of expense to the system, and so we've essentially shackled individuals through the mandate to a really expensive system, and now we're wondering why they're not jumping to buy it, in the face of a $195 penalty or something. It's
which apparently we don't have a mechanism to collect.
It's in some level from a very high level, it's the right framework, but very, very poorly designed to actually function.
Mr. Shulman, you want to weigh in?
Thank you. Hard to know where to start. Certainly everything Mr. Mccracken said, and just the whole approach to this, I believe, is going to leave more people uninsured. The exchanges are a nightmare. People that know how to enroll health insurance are having trouble with the exchanges. Clients, groups just don't know what to do or where to go. A very quick example just to illustrate what does happen to business. You mentioned businesses that are dropping coverage. A client of mine that had insurance a few years ago had to give it up because their business went down with the economy. They called me and said, we're ready again. I met with them in December. Now, normally, I would have enrolled their 3 employees in about 48 hours in a computer in my office with my staff. They would have had temporary ID cards. About 2 weeks later, it all would have gone perfect in D.C. Well, my office manager reminded me, Alan, this is an old group for you, but it's a new group in the system, so they have to go through the D.C. exchange. It took from December 27th to January 15th to enroll them. On January 15th, my office manager said to me, Alan, you have to call the group and tell the employees, now that I have the group enrolled, they have to individually go into the exchange with their password and set themselves up. I said, no, Monica. I said, you'll email the group, you'll get their Social Security number, their password, and all their information, and you'll go in and enroll them because that's what we do. Now Monica tells me 3 days later, well, everything is done and it's fine, but you promised them a January effective date. I said, so they'll have February? I said, it's all done. It's January 27th. I can understand they won't have a January date. They said, no. She said, you haven't been reading your emails from the D.C. exchange, Alan. I said, well, what is it? She said, they will be effective April 1. Now, what do you tell that employer and the 2 young ladies that are off their parents' insurance now and are waiting for their insurance to be effective, have doctor's appointments that they certainly changed from January to February, but now they will be effective April 1. Why? That, to me, is not getting people.
Do you have a sense of how the fines to employers affect their willingness to, Mr. Mccracken, you're smiling, so we're in the same plane here, but affect their willingness or how they incentivize employers to maintain their own historical insurance plans?
I really don't think they have much effect one way or the other, honestly, because it's and that's one of the essential problems. It's very difficult for employers who are over that threshold where they may face a penalty to assess whether or not they're going to have a penalty or not until it's actually imposed, because of the enormous complexity of the law, and there's no way for an employer to know what the household income is of any given employee. They only know what they pay them. There's rules where you're looking back at what people made last year, but applying it to what the situation is this year. So I think employers in that boat are simply going to try to do the calculations as best they can, and the fine is the fine. And I think that has to be the way they approach it.
Mrs. Shulman?
Another example, but first I'll mention there are play or pay calculators that have been developed by a lot of entities where you can put in scenarios for an employer And I definitely agree with Mr. Mccracken. The employers are looking at it, but I don't think it's really going to matter to them. Either they're going to or they're not. And what is worse is every time they spend the time to do it, to look at the cost calculators to see what it costs to play in the market or pay the penalty, they scratch their head and they go, well, I'll wait and see what happens, and it keeps getting delayed. But another example I will give you is that I have a blue-collar group in Virginia that all of their employees are roofers, and these gentlemen do not speak our language, do not understand it, and they're totally confused about health care. Well, they are going to pay individual penalties come April because they are not enrolled in any health care. This group is actually going to get health insurance for these employees and ask them to contribute what their fine is, instead of them being fined because this employer cares to have health insurance in his company. He is already building into every new bid to the consumer a cost for that employee's health insurance.
Can you tell me, anybody, Mr. Arnold, maybe you can weigh in. I'll make the assumption that the marginal gain to hiring a new employee with the kinds of health care issues that the three of you are talking about are reduced, increased? What do you think? As opposed to, say, overtime, or we know about the 40-hour to 30-hour issue. How have you seen that play out? If you have, Mr. Arnold, if not, anyone.
The reality of what Mr. Baker said a while ago, and I'm sorry he's not here, but with all due respect, I don't know what planet that gentleman is from, because what he was telling us a while ago about job security and increasing, people staying in small businesses is exactly the opposite. For example, my cardiologist, he has 25 employees. He paid 100% of all their medical costs, their out-of-pocket costs and everything until recently. They just went through the renewal process that the gentleman here was describing, and their costs went up ridiculously high, anywhere from $300 per person to the $1,600. That's where those numbers came from. This one lady had been working for the cardiologist for 10 years. She was a good employee, but now her rate has gone up $500. That's what she makes in a week. And so she is now faced with either paying the $500 additional a month or quitting work and paying to get her insurance through her husband's insurance, because evidently he hasn't gone through the renewal process yet, and she can get it for $35 increase. So she's not going to be working at the cardiologist's office anymore. I experienced the same thing in my own business, where I can't increase their pay enough for them to be able to help them to pay those exorbitant costs, even if they go to the personal exchange. And so one of my employees left that had been with me 3 years, was a top employee, to go work for a larger restaurant firm so that he could get insurance paid for by them. So the idea of the ACA helping small business keep employees is absolutely ridiculous, because it's not happening. It's the opposite.
Mr. Mccracken, anything left you want to talk about? We got time here.
I'm not sure I have a lot to add to that, but certainly, if we can have a system where employees and workers have a sense of security, I think it would give people an additional reason to think about leaving employment and starting their own business, because that is one of the chief concerns. How am I going to find health insurance? And at some level, the ACA does address how you can find health insurance, but of course the other piece of it is, how am I going to afford health insurance? And I think that's the side of things where people are still deeply concerned, and where the law continues to fall down a bit. If you're going into self-employment, you might think, well, maybe I can get one of these subsidies for health insurance, because they're being pretty generous, but you don't know what you're going to make when you go into self-employment. And you really don't know what that individual market's going to look like, but because people have seen the bungle rollouts of the exchanges, and they hear all the news, I think appropriately positioned, that the individual markets, no one can really predict what those premiums are going to look like, because of the fragility of those markets, and likely inability of the individual mandate to truly bring all the right risks into one pool.
And that doesn't seem to be happening now either, does it? People signing up.
It doesn't seem to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you for, go ahead, Mr. Shulman.
I would like to take this opportunity, thank you, because I'll try not to be too long here, but this is my passion. There's a handful of things that are immediate and absolutely should be done. And some examples, the age bands. The composite rating is the way it should be. The age bands are much too narrow. A perfect example is everyone in this room. If we average the age here, we'd come up with X number. Yet, we all would pay the same premium. However, if we left it the way it is now, the youngest person in this room could be paying the lowest premium, and us in our 60s could be paying the highest premium. I could be perfectly, absolutely lucky Iron Man, but the young person in the room could have diabetes, could have Crohn's, could have, God forbid, anything. They're paying the most. It does not make sense. The second thing is these metal plans. If I sat with every person in this room and did a survey of them, well, what do you think a deductible, co-pay, co-insurance, what would that be? I would have to graph it out, come back to the committee, because every person in this room would have a different idea of their health care. Blue Cross Blue Shield owns this marketplace. It's just how it is. The greater Washington metropolitan area, Northern Virginia, D.C., Maryland suburbs. So I'm usually selling Blue Cross Blue Shield. They have 83% of the market. I used to be able to go to a group of 5 people in Maryland or D.C. or Virginia, and they could choose 3 plans. And they would say, why, Alan? I'd say, well, you're old and have children at home, and you're probably running to the pediatrician all the time. Did my wife talk to you? Yeah. Well, you probably want a copay plan, and you don't mind paying a little more premium. He said, yes, she doesn't want to deal with deductibles. Yet the 24-year-old that just ran a marathon, he says, no, I don't want to pay $300 a month. I want to pay $150 a month. Give me a $1,500 deductible. Then you get to another sheet. After 100 plans on a sheet, you get to a sheet of about 20 prescription plans. So for $100 a month, you could have a prescription plan that had a $250 deductible. Well, if you don't want a $250 and you just wanted the copays, you could pay $175 a month, take away the deductible, have a copay. All of that has been snatched from America. You've been told you can have platinum, gold, silver, bronze, and now we're considering a copper plan. But I have gone from taking groups of 3 to 30 to a real constructive conversation of how do you think your health care should work to literally give them, again, a choice of 3 plans and 3 prescription plans so that you might satisfy this whole room somehow. There isn't any way conceivable to do that now.
So it's limited choice.
Limited choice.
Limited competition. In your experience, it's increased cost. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a philosophy in search of a plan that I think it probably didn't find or did not find. Mr. Arnold?
Yes, sir. I'd like to applaud what he just said. The idea of changing from this, and I don't know where it came from, the age banding to the composite pricing probably would be the most significant suggestion I've heard throughout this whole thing about how it would help reduce the ridiculous increase in the cost. You know, I don't, as a small business owner, I don't understand how something that is entitled Affordable Care Act is so unaffordable. Mm-hmm. The cost is so bad and so high, people just flat can't do it.
Young people don't sign up, that dynamic is not going to change, is it?
No, it's not.
I mean, that's the key to this. And your point, Mr. Shulman, is that maybe some of those people are not paying, because of the banding, are not paying perhaps what they should.
Correct.
So that could be a permanent condition as long as you entice young people at a very, very low rate. That will have the net effect, and we've seen that have the net effect of increasing disproportionately cost to older people. But who can argue that I mean, I would say personally, people with pre-existing conditions should certainly have access to good health care.
To affordable health care. This Act is not going to accomplish that.
Thank you. That's probably the note that we can end on. I want to thank you all for being here today. We have seen that the implementation of the health care law has been problematic, to say the least. American small business deserve a fair and equitable access to comprehensive and affordable health care, but clearly the Affordable Health Care Act is causing significant disruptions for American small businesses. While many parts of the law have been unilaterally delayed, particularly the employer mandate, it seems that the smallest of the small firms that purchase insurance on the individual markets have been neglected. I hope that the administration takes note of this. These issues are not going away, and we here in the Small Business Committee will continue to maintain active oversight on all of these issues. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials. Without objection, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned. Thank you very much.